Hello, all you freedom-loving people. For the first time since the Ukraine war began, the presidents of Russia and U.S. shook hands. Big changes are happening at the IRS, and the FDA may not grant Pfizer's COVID vaccine emergency use for children under 4. Okay, let's get into it. Today, President Trump met with President Putin in Anchorage, Alaska at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before leaving the United States, President Trump posted a simple message on Truth Social saying high stakes. During the flight on Air Force One, which took a little over 6 hours, President Trump talked to reporters.
How are you? What will make a success of this summit today?
I can't tell you that. I don't know. There's nothing set in stone. I want certain things. I want to see a ceasefire. This is not to do with Europe. Europe's not telling me what to do. But they're going to be involved in the process, obviously, as will Zelensky. But I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing. You know, we're not putting up any money. We're making money. They're buying our weapons, and we're sending them to NATO, and NATO's sending us big, beautiful checks. But I don't care about that.
President Trump explained why they met in person instead of a phone call this time.
Look, he's a smart guy, been doing it for a long time, but so have I. Been doing it for a long time. And here we are with President. That was much more difficult than what I'm doing today, believe me. So we get along. There's a good respect level on both sides. And I think, something's going to come of it. I noticed he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia. And that's good. I like that because they want to do business, but they're not doing business until we get the war settled.
Regarding whether land swaps would happen, President Trump said it would be up to Ukraine.
Mr. President, are the territorial swaps on the table? Will you be discussing that?
No, they'll be discussed, but I've got to let Ukraine make that decision. And I think they'll make a proper decision. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get them at a table. And I think you have two sides. Look, Vladimir Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine. If I wasn't president, he would right now be taking all of Ukraine. But he's not going to do it.
When asked by a reporter if the United States would provide security guarantees to Ukraine, President Trump said that there was a possibility of it. President Trump also warned of severe consequences economically for Russia if President Putin does not agree to peace.
You had said earlier this week that Putin would face severe consequences if you get the sense from him that he's not interested. What do you mean by that?
Economically severe. Yes, it will be very severe. I'm not doing this for my health, okay? I don't need it. I'd like to focus on our country, but I'm doing this to save a lot of lives. Yeah, very severe.
Today, President Trump also spoke with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko while aboard Air Force One. After the call, President Trump wrote on Truth Social. The purpose of the call was to thank him for the release of 16 prisoners. We're also discussing the release of 1,300 additional prisoners. We discussed many topics, including President Putin's visit to Alaska. I look forward to meeting President Lukashenko in the future. And before the meeting in Alaska, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said in a post on X that she would nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if President Trump negotiates an end to the war without Ukraine ceding territory. Clinton wrote, "He is meeting with an adversary who wants America's destruction and the end of the entire Western alliance." Reportedly, President Putin has frequently arrived late to meetings with world leaders, sometimes leaving them wait for minutes or hours before his arrival. But earlier today, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that President Putin would arrive punctually for his meeting with President Trump. Peskov also said that talks between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska could take at least 6 to 7 hours overall. But President Trump told Fox News during his flight that if the summit were to fail, he would leave.
In the office with President Trump on Air Force One, heading in, what's your initial feeling? How are you feeling about what you're going to get out of this?
I think we're going to do very well. Our country is doing very well. We're setting records economically like we never have before, including the stock markets are all at a record high. We're taking in trillions and trillions of dollars with tariffs. We're going for a meeting with President Putin in Alaska. And I think it's going to work out very well. And if it doesn't, I'm going to head back home real fast.
I mean, if it doesn't, you walk.
I would walk there.
After the two leaders arrived in Alaska and they greeted each other on the tarmac, at one point the two leaders looked up briefly during a jet flyover with a B-2 bomber, after which President Trump clapped. Later, the two leaders sat down for a private 3-on-3 meeting. On the U.S. side, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff joined President Trump. On the Russian side, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Presidential aide Yuri Ushakov joined President Putin. After the meeting, the two leaders had a press conference, starting with President Putin talking in Russian, followed by President Trump giving some details about the extremely productive meeting.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. Just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon.
He ended his speech by saying that he hopes to see Putin again soon, and Putin suggested maybe Moscow next time. Yesterday, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and the acting Internal Revenue Service Commissioner made an unexpected visit to the IRS headquarters. The IRS whistleblowers Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler were also present during Bessent's visit. The visit comes just 6 days after President Trump removed former IRS Commissioner Billy Long as part of a shakeup at the government agency. Bessent reportedly spent 45 minutes at the headquarters, assuring workers that he would be hands-on as commissioner and he would take over as the interim commissioner until the next leader is confirmed. Yesterday, Just the News reported the visit today was to establish new command and control at the IRS now that Billy Long has left, and to signal the Treasury Secretary intends to have Gary and Joe play a major role in running the department until a new chief has been chosen. So far, it's unclear what their roles will be under Bessent's IRS, but they are currently advisors to the Secretary, and they are focused on integrity and reform. Shapley and Ziegler are known for making protected whistleblower disclosures to Congress about political interference, potential conflicts of interest, and preferential treatment in the tax investigation that was related to President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. Recently, Shapley and Ziegler have maintained that they are still facing retaliation from the Justice Department related to the Hunter Biden case, despite the new presidential administration. According to a recent email that was sent to the state health officials, the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine may become unavailable for some children. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said in an August 8th memo that the Food and Drug Administration, which has granted emergency use authorization for the vaccine for some children recently notified Pfizer of its intent to potentially not renew the emergency use authorization. So if the emergency use authorization is not renewed, then the shot will no longer be available for children who are aged from 6 months to 4 years. For children aged 5 to 11, Pfizer told the CDC that it expects approval for its vaccine for the upcoming virus season. The upcoming virus season starts in the fall and it runs into the winter. In its next meeting, the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee is expected to consider which populations should be advised to receive the vaccines. The FDA clears vaccines while the CDC issues recommendations for them. In the past 2 days, we focused on the debt black hole that was left behind by Evergrande's bankruptcy. Evergrande's rise and fall is a microcosm of the development, leap, and decline of China's real estate industry. China's real estate industry began in the 1990s. Before that, all houses in China were allocated by the state. So how were they allocated? In 1949, shortly after the Chinese Communist Party seized power, it quickly transformed private ownership into public ownership. Simply put, all land and mineral resources belong to the state. All private real estate property also belonged to the state. All private businesses had to be voluntarily handed over to the state. So what if someone refused to hand over their business? The CCP had 100 ways to make you voluntarily hand it over. For example, they'd ask, "Aren't you worried about your children's safety and future? Do you care whether your parents can go to the hospital for treatment?" And so on. During that short period of time in Shanghai, China's most prosperous city, many business people would commit suicide every day because they were unwilling to hand over the businesses that they had worked so hard to build. Of course, we don't know if these businessmen really committed suicide or were murdered, but it is true many chose to jump off buildings. At that time, Chen Yi, the mayor of Shanghai, would ask his secretary every morning when he arrived at the office how many paratroopers there had been the previous day. He referred to the business people who had jumped to their deaths as paratroopers. While others ended their lives in misery, he stood by and mocked them cold-heartedly. But such a heartless person did not meet a good end himself. Before becoming mayor of Shanghai, he was one of the 10 marshals of the Chinese Communist Party holding a prominent position. In addition to serving as mayor of Shanghai, he also concurrently held the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Chinese Communist Party. However, his good fortune did not last long. By 1966, during the Cultural Revolution, he too was purged. A few years later, he passed away in pain. Those who are cruel to others will not be spared by fate. Now, let's return to the topic of real estate. After the Chinese Communist Party confiscated people's homes, they began to redistribute them. The standard for allocation was that Chinese Communist Party officials got the best and largest houses. And ordinary members of the Chinese Communist Party also had an advantage over ordinary people. Among the ordinary people, the poorer they were, the better and larger houses they would get. Because these people were considered the proletarians. They were considered by the Communist Party to be their most staunch supporters and backbone. Meanwhile, previously respected figures in society, such as successful intellectuals and business people, became the targets of the CCP's crackdown. They were assigned to live in the same small, dilapidated houses or apartments that had previously been occupied by the poor. In short, the CCP was implementing a policy of taking away from the intellectuals and the hardworking people to motivate people to not be members of this class. No matter how unreasonable it was, at that time, every family did have a place to live. It didn't matter if it was a small apartment or a room. But soon, problems arose. When the Chinese Communist Party came to power in 1949, the population was 540 million people. At the time, Mao Zedong, the leader of the Communist Party, urged all mothers to have more children, the more the better. As a result, China's population grew rapidly. By 1957, the total population had reached 647 million, an increase of 20% over 8 years. By 1980, China's total population had reached nearly 1 billion, which was nearly double that of 1949. However, the number of housing units did not increase by that much. The Chinese Communist Party is very good at internal struggles, but it knows nothing about economics and it does not attach any importance to it. Before 1980, the Chinese Communist Party focused its energy on fighting internal enemies and military construction. It invested a lot of money in developing atomic bombs, rockets, and underground air raid shelters, and it paid no attention to the quality of life for the people. 80 years ago, China had a planned economy. All resources belonged to the state. Building houses or apartments was also a state activity. Profitable state-owned enterprises would take a portion of their profits to build apartments which were allocated to their employees. Civil servants in government departments waited for government funding to build apartments, but there were not many of these apartments. At that time in China, only apartment buildings were constructed. Detached houses were almost non-existent, and residents who were not civil servants or employees of state-owned enterprises had almost no chance of being allocated an apartment. So where did the people live who were born after 1949? They had to live with their parents. Even if they had children of their own, they could only live with their parents in a small apartment with 3 generations under one roof. Even for those who got an apartment, the apartments given out were very small ones. For example, a 3-bedroom apartment was only 500 square feet, and these were considered large apartments built after China's economy began to improve in the 1980s. This was the housing situation in China before the CCP opened up the real estate market in the 1990s. With this background, it's easy to understand why real estate prices in China have risen exponentially since 1990 as pent-up demand for the past 50 years had suddenly exploded. In 1988, the Chinese Communist Party amended the Constitution. The provision in the Constitution that land cannot be leased was deleted, and it was replaced with the right to use land can be transferred in accordance with the law. So China's real estate industry was officially born. Real estate development requires a large amount of money, the ability to obtain large loans from banks, and official channels to acquire land use rights. These are all barriers to entry into the industry. Therefore, those who initially entered this industry were all people with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party's top leadership, or family members of high-ranking officials, or their white gloves, those frontmen who helped high-ranking officials make money on their behalf. So the situation was gradually changing. Let's take a look at this industry through the experience of Y Qian. In 1992, Y Qian left the state-owned enterprise and came to Shenzhen, the forefront of China's reform and opening up at the time, and he started working as a salesperson. A year later, he asked his boss to help him register a trading company, and he borrowed 100,000 yuan from a friend as startup capital to begin his career as an entrepreneur. He didn't plan to get into real estate at first, since it's an industry that needs a lot of money, and the highest salary he'd ever made was only 3,000 yuan a month, so he didn't have the financial resources for it. But at this point, something strange happened. His company borrowed 20 million yuan from the bank. But how could a company that had to scrape together 100,000 in startup capital borrow 20 million? Y Qian had no entrepreneurial experience either. What could he use as collateral? No one can explain this. Some books about Y Qian say that he borrowed the money through his excellent public relations skills. Others suggest that the sum was obtained with the full endorsement of the Zhongda Group, which was a state-owned company. However, there are no details available online about how the loan was obtained or which bank approved it. From this, we can see that China's banking and financial system was not well developed at the time, and management was lax. So, without that first loan, there would have been no Y Qian real estate empire. Wai Qian's first real estate project was Judao Gardens. At the time, he identified a niche market. Over 80% of newly constructed apartments on the market were large units, which resulted in high prices that were unaffordable for the average wage earner. So he built small, low-priced apartments. Moreover, he made sure the community was beautifully designed and well-equipped before construction began. As a result, people started making reservations even before construction began. Ultimately, the hundreds of apartments he built were sold out on the first day, or rather within a single morning. So Wai Qian used the down payments and the additional bank loans to launch the second phase of development, which generated a profit of 90 million yuan, while the construction had just started. In 1996, the Beijing government decided to cultivate real estate as a new consumer hotspot. As a result, national policies began to stimulate the development of real estate in various ways. Wai Qian also ushered in a period of rapid growth in his career. So, in the next year, the Evergrande Group was officially set up. We'll continue our exclusive on the real estate industry in China on Monday. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember to leave a comment below the video. This is really helping us to be seen all around the world. The more people who watch Front Page, the more freedom-loving people the world will have. And please hit the like button and hit the notification bell after subscribing. And please share this video with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.